started. Hi, everyone. I'm Angela Whitney. I am the co-host of the summit and the co-director of the Green Bank Design Platform. Very happy to have you all join us. I don't know if this is the first session that you've been at during the summit or if you've been attending them all, but this workshop style is much more casual. We will have presentations in the beginning just to set the tone and give a flavor of what we're talking about. But then we really want the second half to be focused on your journey, your questions, thoughts. We have an exercise, but we really want this to be centered around what you want to get out of it. So much more casual format. You'll all be sharing and speaking. So just wanted to set the stage for that. I will run through kind of the opening with a few slides, and then we'll hand it over to my colleague Tamara, and then we'll have some speakers. So Patricia, do you want to show the slides now, please? Great. So first, I just want to call everybody's attention to the fact that for the first half of this session, we have interpretation available into Spanish. So if you go down, you'll see a little globe that says interpretation at the bottom of your screen. If you click on that, you will see a pop-up and you'll see an option to switch into Spanish. So if you prefer to listen to the presentations in Spanish, you can do that. If not, just leave as is. And so hopefully everybody is squared away with listening to whatever language they are most comfortable in. Next slide, please. So just the agenda, which I alluded to, Tamara will set some ground rules and session goals. Rob Youngs from the Coalition for Green Capital will set the stage. Why are we talking about the initial stages of green bank development? Why the initial stages are really important. We'll then hear from 3 other panelists, experts in the field, about their experiences and some lessons learned in the early stages of green bank development. We'll then break out into breakout rooms, and each breakout room will have one of the experts and a facilitator, and we'll walk through a obstacle mapping exercise. And then we'll come back together at the very end and kind of present some key takeaways. Next slide, please. Great. So I will turn it over to my colleague, Tamara.
Hi, everyone, and welcome. Great to have you all here today. I will just briefly go through some of our ground rules and session goals, as Angela mentioned. These are just things to keep in mind as the session progresses, to please keep your microphone muted if you're not speaking to avoid background noise, to keep your video on, to be as present as possible. Keep confidences, which means that if anything is mentioned in the session that other participants would not like shared, to please respect that, as well as all perspectives expressed in our workshop today. And then stepping up and stepping back really just means stepping up and asking questions or providing your perspective when you're comfortable, and stepping back at other moments when you would rather just tune in and listen. Next slide, please. In terms of session goals, what we would really like everyone to take away from this session today is a really good understanding of the core principles of early green bank development, the early 3 stages, or to reinforce it if you already have some background on it. The 3 stages that we are talking about today are initial interest in green bank development, market assessment, and the understanding of every country's landscape, and finally, institutional design, including the most important factors to consider that go with institutional design of the green bank and why it's so important to get that stage right. In addition, and this speaks mostly to our breakout rooms today, we would love our participants to summarize their own challenges and think through their own country environments and obstacles and successes that they have, as well as, any opportunities that you're currently facing, and to help you articulate next steps in your green bank development. I will stop there and hand it over to our first speaker today, who is Rob Youngs from the Coalition for Green Capital. Rob will walk us through why these initial stages are really important, and walk us through some of the main factors that we need to consider, setting the stage for other speakers and expert presentations. Rob, take it away.
All right, thanks so much, Tamara. Hi, everyone. Hope you can hear me. Yeah, glad to be here today and talk about green banks with all of you. So just as quick background, my name is Rob Youngs. I'm a Director of International Green Bank Development at CGC. And just some quick background on us. We're an advisory firm. We're a dedicated shop. All we do is green banks and working with local partners on green bank design and capitalization. And really the key word there is local partners. So in any project that we approach, we focus on working in partnership with the local folks on the ground, developing the goals and working through a project from early stage to fruition. And so we'll get into that process in a second, but CGC, we've been doing this work for about 10 years. We've advised on or created about a dozen green banks around the world, including in the US, with one notable example is the New York Green Bank. That's $1 billion public green investment fund. And internationally, we're working with local partners in countries in Africa, Southeast Asia, and Latin America right now. Some of those projects are in the capital raise phase right now, so hoping to secure capitalization for them this year. So in any country that we work, we go through a 6-step process that really goes from initial scoping to final design and capitalization and launch. I'm not going to get into all the details there, but really focus on some of the core activities that we think about on the front end of that process. So the first step is really doing a landscape analysis and identifying local champions. So there we're looking at, where is the interest coming from? Is it from civil society? Is it from a development partner? Is it from the government or a local development bank? And the key there is really understanding the level of political influence and what's the path towards successful creation. So for the football fans out there, what's the clear shot on goal? And if part of the process is going to require additional political buy-in, then how do we think about starting to build that support? So the next step is really doing a deep pipeline analysis. So that's what sectors could the green bank invest in? Where can it really add value? And to do that work, we do a deep dive via market research and stakeholder interviews, focused mainly on project developers and local financiers. So as we do that process, we're really looking at 3 things. Number one is, do the sectors have broad political support, and does it show up in the national development plans? And I don't mean just the NDC, I mean the development plans of the country. So is that a sector that really resonates and has political importance right now? Number 2 is, where are the current gaps in the market? That is, what are some of the sectors that are currently being left behind by investors, and why? Is it distributed energy? Is it energy efficiency? Is it something else? But really focusing on sort of where the gaps are. And then the third question is, what is the ability of that sector to scale with the right investment or financial products from a green bank? So there we're looking at fundamentals, but really we're looking at the enabling environment as well. So for example, people might be really excited about the off-grid energy sector. That's great, but are the right regulations and incentives in place to make that work? So is there a clear process for mini grid developers to get access to land concessions, or is there some regulatory uncertainty or risk of grid intermediation? Those kinds of technical details are really important. So those are the important things we look at as we build the case, right? Are there gaps in the current offerings, and in what sectors, and can those sectors scale? It's really not enough to have one or the other. We look for both there. And the reason we do that goes back to the first point about finding local champions and building support. So by having a clear view on the pipeline and how the green bank, potential green bank can add value, we're really developing the story of the green bank that can be digestible for decision makers. You're developing a theory of change. Really, if you do X, you get Y, making it really simple. And laced through all that work is identifying where is the strongest political support. And I mean that from the government, yes, but also, looking at other actors like local development partners. So for example, in low to medium income countries, a lot of times you'll need more funding for the next sort of design and launch phase of a green bank. And that might be coming from development partners. So you need to be working with them as well to think about help both the government and the development partners understand where's the buy-in, what are the potential impacts, who are the local beneficiaries and stakeholders, and how can the program be additive to what's already on the ground, and how can it be complementary to the activities that those development partners might already be funding, right? So, and then the final sort of really important stakeholder we engage at this early stage are DFI partners. So that might be the local national development bank, for instance, if the Green Bank is going to be a new program within the NDB, or looking at also the major regional MDBs active in the region. So, for example, in the two countries we're working with right now in Africa and Southeast Asia, we're working closely with DFIs as they're acting as the anchor capitalization for those green banks, and they're also acting as they're enabling us to access grants and low-cost capital from the Green Climate Fund. And so, again, having the DFIs really understand the theory of change and the market approach is critical at the early stage of any sort of green bank engagement. And that's because ultimately, our approach to the work is grounded in designing programs that can secure funding. So it's fine to do a market scoping or write a series of recommendations, but really our goal is to work with local partners, keep our eyes focused on the ultimate goal of creating a new program or fund with real capital behind it. And so a big part of doing that work is focusing on, good fund management, the credit policies and procedures, the risk management, the staff, et cetera, so that everyone involved, the government, the development partners, the DFIs can really understand how the Green Bank is going to be managed so it can actually implement the goals that you're talking about. So that sort of design work is also really critical, but I'm not going to get into that here, because I think I'm at time, and that we're going to get more into the institutional design work from some of our following speakers. So yeah, I think with that, I'll wrap it up and thanks to the organizers and pass it back to you, Tamara.
Great, I'll jump in. Thanks so much, Rob. That was a great overview, and I think hit on some of the key considerations when deciding first whether or not a green bank is the right option, and then how to actually roll up your sleeves and get started. So now we have our panelists, and I will introduce them one at a time. First, I just want to say that if you have questions, put them in the chat and we'll do our best to get to them at the end. And maybe even some of the experts can respond directly in the chat. So with that, I am going to introduce Jonathan first. Jonathan helped really I think we're going to talk about champions. Jonathan was the champion and really made the DBSA, the climate finance facility within DBSA happen. And Jonathan is now managing director of Jonathan, sorry, remind me where you at GFA. GFA. Okay. Apologies. And do you want to get us started, Jonathan?
Sure. So just briefly introduction before I have one slide that I'd like to talk to. So until February this year, I was at the Development Bank of Southern Africa. I was there for 9 years, but the last 5 years been very much involved in climate and impact funding. And probably the 3 years of the 5 years spent most of the time developing the so-called Green Bank within the DBSA. So if I can put up the slide, I think it's very important to discuss, what's involved in terms of championing a green bank within a financial institution. So I've had long debates with a number of people about the enabling environment. And I still remain convinced that we need to differentiate between the developed world and the developing world if we're truly to understand how you can champion a green bank within the developing world. I think we can get a lot of guidance and inspiration from the developed world green banks, and I certainly did. But I think we need to recognize that in the developing world, there are some fundamental differences. And I think this is important because it contextualizes why the DBSA was successful in setting up its so-called green bank. In the developed world, they have fortunately a number of advantages. First of all, they can be funded by government, or they can be funded by the local community if it's a regional green bank. In my mind, and certainly the evidence is such that this cannot happen and does not happen in the developing world. Governments are fiscally constrained, and the funding for the green bank has to come from somewhere else. That's the second thing. The first thing. Sorry, the second thing is often there is a defined pipeline which defines that green bank. So, for example, if I'm not mistaken, in the UK, it was around the wind farms, the offshore wind farms. And so that's the second one as well, is that in the developing world, there is no defined pipeline. And I think Rob Youngs alluded to this. So it has to be developed and it has to be understood. And then the third one is that in the developed world, they can buy in human resource capability, because setting up and running a so-called green bank does require a team. And this can, as I said, be bought in the developed world. It's far more difficult to do that in the developing world. So with all of that in mind, I've identified 4 enabling environments. And I think it's very important when we move to the workshop stage to identify where you sit within these 4 pillars, because I think it's within the 4 pillars that you can define how best to develop a green bank. So a regional DFI, in my view, is extremely difficult to do. And the reason I say that is I was involved in the South African Power Pool, which effectively is like, it's not a green bank, but it was trying to do the same thing. And it was absolutely fraught with geopolitical issues. And so I don't think a regional DFI can work. I'm not saying it's impossible, but I think it's extremely difficult. Within the national context, I think there's 3 models. The one is where there's no development finance institution, and I understand that Vietnam is such a case. It is the most difficult, in my view, to set up a green bank. As once again, it's going to take long. It's going to take longer to do so. Obviously, it's not impossible, but it can happen. The second one is the private sector, where there's a private sector DFI, and I know of 2. And this was based on the last Green Bank Summit in Paris a couple of years back, where Lebanon and Ukraine certainly were identified as 2 countries which had private sector DFIs. I think that certainly represents an enabling environment. However, I think that the amount of government support is obviously limited. And then the third one, which I think is the best environment in the sense that it can happen the quickest, is where there is a national DFI. And I've put down here 4 examples, because certainly those are ones that I'm aware of or I have worked with, where the national DFI has been the champion of the Green Bank or the Green Bank Initiative. There are also then sort of 3 aspects that we have to be mindful of within the developing the developing country model. Is one that, as I said, fiscal funding is not readily available. And as Rob did say, you need to understand how the green bank can be funded. In my view, it is best to set up a green bank via a funding facility, such as what we did for the DBSA, where we created the Climate Finance Facility, which was co-funded by the DBSA and the Green Climate Fund. The second is the pipeline, and often within either private sector DFI or a national DFI, there is an existing pipeline, or it's easier to develop the pipeline because the infrastructure is there within the DFI. So the pipeline is a very important one, And as once again, to repeat what Rob said, you need to define and develop that pipeline within the mandate of the Green Bank. And then lastly, the other reason I like either the private sector or the national DFI, there is an existing resource capability. It might not be ideally structured, but it's something to work with. So within the DVSA context, for example, we could build a team around what was there at the time. So I think, my message to you is the champion is absolutely important. There's someone within the organization or a couple of people that have to really believe and have to fight to set it up. I had to fight. But I think that you also have to recognize the enabling environment in which you operate, because I believe that could also accelerate the success of a green bank within the developing world context. So that's it from me. Thank you very much and look forward to the workshop.
Great. Thanks so much, Jonathan. I think that was a great place to start. Next, we are going to hear from Susana Escária from Portugal. Susana is the Secretary General of the Environment and Climate Action, and she is going to talk about her experience helping lead Portugal in trying to understand what the local environment was and what the best solution was for that context. So building right off what Jonathan was just saying. So with that, Susana, can you please explain your experience?
Thank you. Thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm a director for site and planning in Secretary General for Environment and coordinating a group of 20 entities in Portugal that are looking for sustainable financial sustainability in Portugal. And also we see the launch and the creation of a green bank in Portugal. This bank was created in September 2020. And in this core set, it was main to financing the ecological and digital transitions, supporting projects and initiatives aimed to the decarbonization of the economy, energy transition, as well as the focus of territorial cohesions. Following the Rob and Jonathan have said already, this bank is created for the merger of several mutual entities in Portugal. They are funds for the budget, national budget. They are allowed by the central bank. They act as a promotional bank in Portugal. So they are going to help the commercial banks to be a guarantee, a collateral. And his main focus now, they are starting now, is going to be helping the Portugal Recovery and Resilience Plan. So they are going to help commercial banks to support the co-financing of the projects that are starting to launch the calls and to implement it. So in this regard, this new financial institute should act as the trigger to develop and raise key financial instruments to support the transition for a circular and neutral economic model and aligned to the Euro recent development in sustainable finance. So in the talking regarding, remember what Jonathan says, they are looking for this profile tool. So they are looking for the best investments, sustainable investments, and is going to be key to promote these green investments, but not ignoring the fact that the project risk analysis must include what project is able to do for fighting or worsening climate change. So this is a key aspect for us. And doing this in Portugal, this new green bank, as we call it, Banco Português de Fomento, is going to, through capacitation, funding, and hasten the several existing financial sources. Therefore, the institution will offer an opportunity to accelerate and catalyze the investment in the decarbonization need to meet the net zero target that we have as a national priority. So this bank mission is to develop the economy and the entrepreneur community by financing solutions that address market failures in the accessing to financing. His statute claims that in following this mission, it should also promote sustainability and focus on carbon neutrality. So this grants the bank a unique mandate for challenging and finance towards decarbonization. Also should focus on renewable energies, energy efficient transports, and the agriculture and land use sectors. Due to the potential of these sectors have to transition to circular carbon neutral economy and the requirements of funding shown by the most of the companies in Portugal. So this new green banking approach can help Portugal achieve this green and climate ambitious. And they were solved as the survey performed by Vivid Economics that assess in the most biggest bank regulators and companies in Portugal, what was the gaps and what was our national priorities regarding sustainable investments. So therefore, we should see that our priorities and this bank should be seen as an ally to the commercial banks, and also as a guarantee for the companies and investors that you can assess and have sustainable investments in Portugal in the main areas of the Recovery and Resilience Plan. And there are sustainable forest management to protect and enhance resilience and promote diversity, water efficiency plans that will reduce vulnerability to water scarcity, energy efficiency in public and private buildings, and we focus on households also, renewable energy sources, including green hydrogen and creation of the renewable energy communities, sustainable mobility, including investments in the metro network, light rail, in the clean public transport fleets, or in the bioeconomy sector, focus on the incorporation of nature-based materials in the clothing, footwear, and resin sector. And finally, in the decarbonization of the industry manufacturing sector. So all this must, since we are in the European community, all this must be complying with the do not significant harm principle that are in the taxonomy regulation since last year. So we have to build on this, and I'm looking forward to any questions that you might have, and thank you.
Thanks so much, Susana. That was, you guys have been up to a lot of work in the last couple of years, so very exciting to hear your progress. I'm now going to introduce our last panelist, Gavin Templeton. Gavin is now a partner at the Pollination Group, but has had a long career of working on green banks. Prior to Pollination, he was with Macquarie, and before that with the UK GIB, one of the first green banks, and so has a lot of experience, both thinking through the establishment of green banks and then also on the operations side. So Gavin, can you take us away?
I can indeed. Thank you very much for that kind invitation to speak, and good to see you all. So I think I've got some slides which I'm going to talk to over the next little period. So as was mentioned, I was part of the team that set up the UK Green Investment Bank, which was eventually sold to Macquarie and became the Green Investment Group. And I have currently and in the past been involved in advising green banks and the setup of green investment banks. So let's move on to the next slide. So I guess one of the things, and a lot of this learning has come from, what we did when we set up the UK Green Investment Bank and some of the key steps that we took. And these, these stages and steps and reflections equally apply, for everyone as they're thinking about setting up a green investment bank. And really the first stage is about stakeholder engagement. It's been mentioned throughout. The speakers, have mentioned the importance of engaging with different stakeholders. But really, you should be thinking about every interaction that you might be having or the institution might be having, and the different types of stakeholders that you would like to engage with. And I've set some of these out here. So obviously government and public bodies, ministries of finance typically are the ones who have got the checkbook, or at least have control of the finances. But think about the regulators, the Securities and Exchange Commissions as well, and other financial institutions, as well as the domestic banks who are potentially going to be working alongside any new green investment bank. We don't want there to be a sense that you're creating competition. This is about facilitating flows of finance into green projects, in building that trust early on with the domestic market and financial institutions. And that domestic market is always something you need to do in order to facilitate long-term success. International investors, it's been mentioned before. I mean, clearly in the DFI and multilateral world, they are going to be really key stakeholders, potentially providing some of that funding. The Green Climate Fund, who I think have been engaged in a couple of sessions previous to this one, are a key stakeholder in that regard. We were working with them on the capitalization of the Mongolian Green Bank, and I think they've got appetite to do more. Civil society, NGOs, always make sure that you're aligned. What's happening in grassroots organizations, they will potentially have a really good insight into what some of the challenges, what some of those market failures that need to be addressed are. We did a lot of engagement with big NGOs, and that served us very well throughout the life of the Green Investment Bank. On to the next slide, please. And then around key principles for designing a successful green investment bank, suitability to context. I think we would all agree that every single green bank that has been created has had very distinct nuances and differences depending on what the political and economic and market context is within the market where it's created. You need to make sure that you are designing the institution from the bottom up. Clarity of role is extremely important. This can be helped through transparency, but ultimately it's really, really important that all stakeholders and all those stakeholders that I mentioned in the previous page have a very clear understanding of what the Green Bank is there to do. That was something that we spent a lot of time doing when we set up the Green Investment Bank. We had a very distinct role in the market. One thing that we did not do was venture capital, but we spent a lot of time talking to the market about the fact that we were not doing venture capital, just to make sure there was no misunderstanding and potentially, disappointing stakeholders before you had got going. Independence, really important. If you're going to be a credible long-term market participant, there can be no inference of political, interference, if you like. So how do you put in place caveats to ensure that you are independent as an institution? Certainly one thing that we did in the UK was create a law whereby the independence of the institution was enshrined in law. That's something that we have advised other governments to do as well. Additionality, make sure what you're doing would lead to an outcome of what would not have occurred in its absence. What I would call, what do we call it? Well, you are investing in the gap in the market. In effect, you are, trying to address those market failures, trying to lead the market forward into things where it's not currently operating. And then finally, on risk mitigation, you need to be a good custodian of capital. Ultimately, if you're going to be attracting foreign direct investment into your country, or you have to be designing an institution to show that it's upholding the highest level of risk mitigation. On to the next slide, please. And then setting the right mandate and operating principles. And again, a lot of this you will have heard before. Having a distinct mission, ensuring that is very clearly communicated. Having a green mission at its core. Market role, be additional. Make sure you're there to fill the gaps in the market, in the financial system. Be ambitious. Now, the market failures or the market issues that you're addressing today may not be the same market issues that you're addressing tomorrow. So be ambitious and be flexible. Make sure you have the right products available to be able to address any particular issue. At the Green Investment Bank in the UK, we could use every single financial product that was available, from guarantees to debt to equity to mezzanine. We were a fund manager. We catalyzed other and invested in other funds. We were fund of funds business. So we did absolutely everything because we didn't know what issues were going to emerge in the market that we had to address. And then on operating principles, be disciplined, ensure you've got high quality policies, ensure you've got a strong board, aligned with international best practice. The point on being independent, you can be trusted. So if you ensure you're free from political interference, the private sector will more likely invest in the market where you're active if it can be sure that the market is free from political interference. And then finally, be profitable. And I guess this is something that, there should be a journey from going from grant funding to concessional funding to commercial funding as well. Because, if you're investing in projects, you want to make sure you're preserving your capital. And where the private sector can take over, you should let it take over, again, to that point of being additional. So preservation of capital and moving from one difficult sector to the next and letting the private sector take hold is certainly a principle, operating principle that I would underline. Onto the next slide. And then on the right model, and this is our final slide, and what we've got here is actually the Green Investment Bank model. So this is the model that we designed in the UK, but there are lots of different models. And again, this is alluded to by Jonathan. And we've seen other different models emerge into the market. So joint ventures where the government may end up partnering up with an institution in order to build its own capability over a time period. There's a green fund model where you develop a fund which is capitalized by international sources that potentially is managed by a third-party fund manager. And the Green Investment Bank model is one where the institution had its own balance sheet and its own people in order to be able to execute its mandate. What I would always say is that there is no right answer to this. It will be distinct in terms of the circumstances, and it will be distinct in terms of what the initial analysis and the work with the government or the stakeholders in the country or the region who are interested in developing the Green Bank. And I'll leave it there. Thank you very much, Angela.
Great, thanks, Gavin. I think you provided a lot of good context of why getting the institutional design right and thinking through some of the key factors is, especially kind of before it's too late, before you get ahead of yourself. We have a long question that just came in from Javier, and I'm wondering, Javier, if you just want to ask the question, everybody can hear it, and then we can answer it before we move to the next section.
Sure, thanks for that, and sorry for the background noise. So the gist of it is that, as many of you know, Puerto Rico is a bit in the middle of, the developing world and the developed world, and Puerto Rico is also politically not quite international enough to be in the radar of institutions like the IDB, but not quite American or US enough to be in the radar also of many public and private entities that help out, in this narrative that we all believe in. And also, I mean, there's misalignment between what Puerto Ricans want and showed by our legislation, local legislation. We have a 100% RPS, renewables RPS by 2050, and even 40% by 2025, when right now we're still 97% dependent on fossil fuels. That's legislated, but at the same time, Puerto Rico is going through a statewide, Commonwealth-wide bankruptcy process under a federal law that is focused on austerity. So it's a highly, highly complex and highly specific set of facts. I think Puerto Rico can learn a lot because we're part of the Latin American world culturally, for sure. And I wonder if there's insights that panelists could give on such a specific situation on Puerto Rico, what's applicable or not applicable from their perspective. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Javier. Any insights from the panelists?
I could say something quickly there. I think everything you said is right. Puerto Rico is in a unique sort of situation. It can't access funding from places like IDB or GCF or others. It does get funding from the United States, obviously, but it can be limited in how it's used. I actually lived in Puerto Rico for a while, so I'm a bit familiar with it. One thing that's probably already on your radar that, but if it's not, it should be, is CGC. We're working on an international, or a domestic climate bank program right now. It's to create a federal green bank in the United States, which would do two things. It'll directly fund projects, and it'll also pass funding to state and local green banks, like existing ones like the New York Green Bank or Connecticut Green Bank, as well as potentially new green banks at the state level. And so that legislation has passed Congress twice, and now it's passed the House of Representatives twice. We're hoping it'll move through the infrastructure package that's being debated right now. And part of that, a key design that's in there is that Puerto Rico will be one of the eligible to receive funding from that program. So right now it's targeted for $100 billion of capitalization. There's different versions of the bill, around 27 billion, but regardless, if it does move through, it'll be a substantial program that has the potential to put money into places like Puerto Rico. And again, it'd have to look at, all the things that the panelists already talked about in terms of what are the market gaps, what kind of role could it play, what kind of financial products would be most suited to support Puerto Rico, especially given the kind of the debt situation and the utility and all the challenges in Puerto Rico. But it's sort of a perfect place where there's a high need for support. And so that's something to keep an eye on, is this National Green Bank and the potential to provide some support to Puerto Rico there.
I could just add to that. I mean, I'm not familiar with Puerto Rico, but I just looked very quickly. There is a development bank, government development bank. Could it not represent the sort of genesis of a green bank within Puerto Rico?
Well, sorry, thanks for that. As I mentioned in my written part of my question, is that all of Puerto Rico's public institutions, and including that government development bank, are under a bankruptcy process. So state-centered solutions seem to not be the way forward. Maybe the way forward has to be in Puerto Rico. It has to do with finding local private champions that are financially, financial institutions that are private. Maybe there is a green bank that has been legislated, but it just exists in statute. I think the task there is to make it real somehow with a local partner that is a real entity, and maybe it's a private one. So that's part of the thing we're trying to figure out locally. We're aware of the green accelerator federally. Thanks for that. But we need to have that entity, the local entity in place that will be, the adult to manage that. And that's our challenge right now. But it's very, very helpful. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, everyone. Not seeing any more questions. I am going to propose that we move to the next section of this workshop, which is where you all get to ask more questions and participate in an exercise. I will say at the outset that we have an exercise that you will walk through, but this is really meant to be helpful and useful to your own circumstances. So we want to have productive conversation. So if you, one, don't make it through the exercise, or you know, have another conversation, that's a great outcome as well. So the way that the breakout rooms work, Patricia, can I see the slides? So we will have, you will be broken out into a room with one expert and one facilitator, a random combination. If you've never used Zoom breakout rooms before, all you have to do is make sure that you join a room or accept a room. So please just do that. And then if you need to leave a room for whatever reason, there's two options. There's leave breakout room or leave meeting. So if you don't want to leave the meeting, just make sure that you just leave the room. If you need to go to another room or back to the main stage. So with that, you will get more instructions in your room. But now we will go into our breakout rooms for the exercise. So thanks all. I really am looking forward to this next phase.